That is the one sin for which there is no forgiveness, but we are not likely to suffer from it unless these fellows keep chatting about the thing at dinner. I must tell them the subject is to be tabooed. The only thing that would make me bored is listening to anything about this dead guy. As for omens, there is no such thing as an omen. Destiny does not send us heralds. She is too wise or too cruel for that. Besides, what on earth could happen to you, Dorian? You have everything in the world that a man can want. There is no one who would not be delighted to change places with you. There's no one with whom I would not change places, Harry. Don't laugh like that. I'm telling you the truth. Interesting. Dorian wished for eternal youth, and he got it. It seemed like the most wonderful thing in the world. Is it? He'd trade places with anyone. What's Oscar Wilde saying here? The wretched peasant who just died is better off than I am. I have no terror of death. It is the coming of death that terrifies me. Its monstrous wings seem to wheel in the leaden air around me. Good heavens, don't you see a man moving behind the trees there, watching me, waiting for me? Lord Henry looked in the direction in which the trembling gloved hand was pointing. Yes, he said, smiling. I see the gardener waiting for you. I suppose he wants to ask you what flowers you wish to have on the table tonight. How absurdly nervous you are, my dear fellow. You must come and see my doctor when we get back to town. Dorian heaved a sigh of relief as he saw the gardener approaching. The man touched his hat, glanced for a moment at Lord Henry in a hesitating manner, and then produced a letter which he handed to his master. Her Grace told me to wait for an answer, he muttered. Her Grace is the Duchess. It's a traditional term for a Duchess. Dorian put the letter into his pocket. Tell her Grace that I am coming in, he said coldly. The man turned round and went rapidly in the direction of the house. How fond women are of doing dangerous things, laughed Lord Henry. It is one of the qualities in them that I admire most. A woman will flirt with anybody in the world as long as other people are looking on. How fond you are of saying dangerous things, Harry. In the present instance, you are quite astray. I like the Duchess very much, but I don't love her. And the Duchess loves you very much, but she likes you less, so you are excellently matched. You are talking scandal, Harry, and there is never any basis for scandal. The basis of every scandal is an immoral certainty, said Lord Henry, lighting a cigarette. You would sacrifice anybody, Harry, for the sake of an epigram. The world goes to the altar of its own accord, was the answer. I wish I could love, cried Dorian Gray with a deep note of pathos in his voice, but I seem to have lost the passion and forgotten the desire. I am too much concentrated on myself. My own personality has become a burden to me. I want to escape, to go away, to forget. It was silly of me to come down here at all. I think I shall send a wire to Harvey to have the yacht got ready. On a yacht, one is safe. So clearly he's thinking about escaping from James by getting on the yacht here. But let's look at some of the other stuff in this little bit. He says, I wish I could love, so he seems to have lost the capability of loving somebody else. And he says that he is too much concentrated on himself. So the implication here by Wilde is that love requires selflessness, whereas a seeking for pleasure is a selfish act. And so the distinction between love and lust, if you will, is one is a selfless act and the other is a selfish act. I think that's worth noting. And safe from what, Dorian? You are in some trouble. Why not tell me what it is? You know I would help you. I can't tell you, Harry, he answered sadly, and I dare say it is only a fancy of mine. This unfortunate accident has upset me. I have a horrible presentiment that something of the kind may happen to me. What nonsense! I hope it is, but I can't help feeling it. Ah, here's the Duchess, looking like Artemis in a tailor-made gown. You see we have come back, Duchess. I have heard all about it, Mr. Gray, she answered. Poor Geoffrey's is terribly upset, and it seems you asked him not to shoot the hare. How curious. Yes, very curious. I don't know what made me say it. Some whim, I suppose. It looked the loveliest of little live things, but I am sorry they told you about the man. It's a hideous subject. It's an annoying subject, broke in Lord Henry. It has no psychological value at all. Now, if Geoffrey had done the thing on purpose, how interesting he would be. I should like to know someone who had committed a real murder. Aha, that's irony, right? Like, here he is standing next to Dorian Gray, who's murdered Basil, and he's like, I wish I knew a real murderer. Does Lord Henry know? Is this a Satan moment again? There's no way to tell, but it's just incredibly ironic the way that he says it. How horrid of you, Harry, cried the Duchess. Isn't it, Mr. Gray? Harry, Mr. Gray's ill again. He's going to faint. Of course, Dorian hears this and starts to faint. Dorian drew himself up with an effort and smiled. It's nothing, Duchess, he murmured. My nerves are dreadfully out of order, that is all. I am afraid I walked too far this morning. I didn't hear what Harry said. Was it very bad? You must tell me some other time. I think I must go and lie down. You will excuse me, won't you? They had reached the great flight of steps that led from the conservatory onto the terrace. As the glass door closed behind Dorian, Lord Henry turned and looked at the Duchess with his slumberous eyes. Are you very much in love with him? He asked. She did not answer for some time, but stood gazing at the landscape. I wish I knew, she said at last. He shook his head. Knowledge would be fatal. It is the uncertainty that charms one. A mist makes things wonderful. One may lose one's way. All ways end at the same point, my dear Gladys. What's that? Disillusion. It was my debut in life, she sighed. Remember, she's married to an old 60-year-old duke, so that's probably what that's a reference to. It came to you crowned. I'm tired of strawberry leaves. That would be the seal of Monmouth that her husband has, so it's sort of like a metonymy, like the seal representing him as a person. They become you, only in public. You won't miss them, said Lord Henry. I will not part with a petal. Monmouth has ears. Old age is dull of hearing. Has he never been jealous? I wish he had been. He glanced round as if in search of something. What are you looking for? She inquired. The button from your foil. That's a metaphor. A foil is a fencing sword. They have a little button on the end. That makes it so you can't hurt each other. He's implying that she's fencing with her husband, but she's taken the button off her sword, which makes it a dangerous weapon. You have dropped it, she laughed. I still have the mask. It makes your eyes lovelier, was his reply. She laughed again. Her teeth showed like white seeds in a scarlet fruit. Is that a reference to strawberries again? And this fruit, sort of garden imagery coming back. What do we do with that? Upstairs in his own room, Dorian Gray was lying on the sofa, with terror in every tingling fiber of his body. Life had suddenly become too hideous a burden for him to bear. The dreadful death of the unlucky beater, shot in the thicket like a wild animal, had seemed to him to prefigure death for himself also. He had nearly swooned at what Lord Henry said in a chance mood of cynical jesting. At 5 o'clock, he rang his bell for his servant and gave him orders to pack his things for the night express to town, and to have the brougham at the door by 8:30. He was determined not to sleep another night at Selby Royal. It was an ill-omened place. Death walked there in the sunlight. The grass of the forest had been spotted with blood. Then he wrote a note to Lord Henry, telling him that he was going up to town to consult his doctor and asking him to entertain his guests in his absence. As he was putting it into the envelope, a knock came to his door, and his valet informed him that the head keeper wished to see him. He frowned and bit his lip. Send him in, he muttered after some moments' hesitation. As soon as the man entered, Dorian pulled out his checkbook and spread it out before him. All right, so again, the social commentary with the beater's death goes on. Dorian's just going to pay it off. Let me pay some money and it'll make everything all right. The rich don't have to worry about morality because they have a checkbook. I suppose you have come about the unfortunate accident of this morning, Thornton, he said, taking up a pen. Yes, sir, answered the gamekeeper. Was the poor fellow married? Had he any people dependent on him? Asked Dorian, looking bored. If so, I should not like them to be left in want, and will send them any sum of money you may think necessary. Two little tidbits here. He's looking bored as he says this, and he's not talking about money that will ease their burdens. Money that he may think is necessary. He wants to pay the minimum amount of money that's necessary to shut this whole thing up. We don't know who he is, sir. That's what I took the liberty of coming to you about. Don't know who he is, said Dorian listlessly. What do you mean? Wasn't he one of your men? No, sir. Never saw him before. Seems like a sailor, sir. The pen dropped from Dorian Gray's hand, and he felt as if his heart had suddenly stopped beating. A sailor? He cried out. Did you say a sailor? Yes, sir. He looked as if he had been a sort of sailor, tattooed on both arms and that kind of thing. Was there anything found on him? Said Dorian, leaning forward and looking at the man with startled eyes. Anything that would tell his name? Some money, sir, not much, and a 6-shooter. There was no name of any kind. A decent-looking man, sir, but rough-like, a sort of sailor, we think. Dorian started to his feet. A terrible hope fluttered past him. He clutched at it madly. "Where's the body?" he exclaimed. "Quick, I must see it at once." "It's in an empty stable at the home farm, sir. The folk don't like to have that sort of thing in their houses. They say a corpse brings bad luck." "The home farm? Go there at once and meet me. Tell one of the grooms to bring my horse round. No, never mind. I'll go to the stables myself. It will save time." In less than a quarter of an hour, Dorian Gray was galloping down the long avenue as hard as he could go. The trees seemed to sweep past him in a spectral procession, and wild shadows to fling themselves across his path. Once the mare swerved at a white gatepost and nearly threw him. He lashed her across the neck with his crop. She cleft the dusky air like an arrow. Nice simile there. It's kind of the most action that's happened in this book, let's be honest. The stones flew from her hooves. At last, he reached the home farm. 2 men were loitering in the yard. He leaped from the saddle and threw the reins to one of them. In the farthest stable, a light was glimmering. Something seemed to tell him that the body was there, and he hurried to the door and put his hand upon the latch. There he paused for a moment, feeling that he was on the brink of a discovery that would either make or mar his life. Then he thrust the door open and entered. On a heap of sacking in the far corner was lying the dead body of a man dressed in a coarse shirt and a pair of blue trousers. A spotted handkerchief had been placed over the face. A coarse candle stuck in a bottle sputtered beside it. Dorian Gray shuddered. He felt that his could not be the hand to take the handkerchief away, and called out to one of the farm servants to come to him. "Take that thing off the face. I wish to see it," he said, clutching the doorpost for support. When the farm servant had done so, he stepped forward. A cry of joy broke from his lips. The man who had been shot in the thicket was James Vane. He stood there for some moments, looking at the dead body. As he rode home, his eyes were full of tears, for he knew that he was safe. If you're annoyed by this, so was I the first time I read this. I was like, what? And I chucked the book across the room because Dorian deserves some poetic justice. And of course he gets none, and he gets none, and he gets none because he looks so good. People assume the best out of him. And he has this easy, charmed, perfect life that he doesn't deserve. And he's an allegory, remember, for Victorian humanity and the British, and maybe for rich people in general and how they get everything handed to them and everything is easy. Or maybe attractive people. I mean, it's pretty clear that attractive people have an easier time in life. There have been studies on this. But let's talk about James for just a second before I close this thing off. James Vane died. If you recall, James had a quote-unquote race hatred of gentlemen. He is shot by a gentleman, by the Duchess's brother. And so his story comes to a lack of poetic justice conclusion. James seems like a decent fellow, trying to take revenge in a way that seems justified to us as readers. He doesn't get poetic justice because he's poor, and Dorian doesn't either because he's rich. All right. We will stop and think about that. I'll come back maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day with chapter 19. There's only 2 chapters left in the whole book. It'll be done here pretty soon. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you later.